All right, so it's just gone 12 o'clock, so we might kick off. I'll just put that up there and people there. All right, so welcome everyone to this episode of Points, Lines and Polygons. Our special guest, Lisa Cornish, is a data journalist, and with her company, Data Know-How. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have a question, either put it in the chat or we'll have a question and answer session at the end. If you're not chatting, just keep yourself on mute if you can, please. All right, so welcome, Lisa. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of Points, Lines and Polygons. As I sort of explained earlier, it's really just a sort of, I guess, a bit more of a casual conversation about you and your career. And so I guess if you want to, take us back as far as you like, whether that be uni days or after, in some of those early jobs, and tell us how you, I guess, started in the spatial industry, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, I will take you back to uni days because working in geospatial was not on the agenda at all. I was actually studying archaeology and had the whole Indiana Jones dreams going on. But then a presenter came to one of our seminars and presented about the geospatial work that he was doing combined with archaeology. And it became that aha moment that so much made sense in terms of thinking about history, thinking about archaeology, understanding where things were. If you were going to discover a lost city, you kind of need to understand the history of how things were set up. So my postgraduate went into a Master's of Applied Science in Geomatics, where I was doing a master's thesis combining archaeology and geospatial. So it took me down a bit of a different path. But then from there, it was just geospatial. I started working with the Country Fire Authority in Victoria, supporting their bushfire mapping, travelling around the state, actually mapping the fire stations correctly so they could actually do proper modelling. Then I did some work as well in China, where I was working on a youth ambassador program with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where I was in Inner Mongolia, working with a program that was looking at the desertification of the area and how to bring the greenery back to areas that had been turned into desert because of the changing in farming practices. So that was really, really getting that different element while thinking of that geospatial is really, really important and fundamental in understanding what's happening and modelling how you can undo it, looking at how it happened and potentially how you can undo it. And since then, I've done work with a lot of different sectors where I've understood a lot more about how geospatial and thinking actually really is that my background noise? I don't think it's me.
I might just ask Christine if you can put yourself on mute for now. I'm not sure if it's from you, but yeah, so let's try that again. Sorry.
Thanks for noting that. Yeah, so I work in different sectors, and then, as you noted, I've moved into more of a broader data. I work as a data journalist, data communication specialist as well. What's happened since I've moved kind of into more the broader data, I've really understood how much geospatial is important, but not really well understood. So what tends to happen, and working as a data journalist, it was really great having a geospatial background, because one of the most important things to personalize story, to get down to detail that makes people engage, is thinking location. What does this mean for me? One of the big things is location. So really understanding that difference between, you know, what someone will experience in a remote Indigenous community versus someone in Melbourne and Sydney. They're very different, they're very diverse. So bringing geospatial location elements in to stories is really fundamental in helping people understand what it means to them. So that was always really important, but it's very evident how important it is in geospatial in terms of developing policy, in terms of evaluating, but it is really poorly understood. And the geospatial units within organizations still feel like they're a geospatial unit, they're a specialized area, whereas the people that are making the policy decisions aren't engaging with those areas very well. One of the challenges that I see just at the moment working with federal government agencies based in Canberra is I'm only still getting some to get off using 2011 ABS boundaries. They don't even realise what the difference is between that and 2021, and we're just about to go into the new information for the new census. So it's constantly being used, geospatial. People just are not aware of it. There's not enough education. When you've got the centralisation with the data within the organisation, centralising that, geospatial is rarely part of the conversation unless it's really fundamental to the work the organisation's doing. The likes of departments of environment, yes, but even the likes of infrastructure-based organisations, that is not necessarily part of the centralisation of data conversation. It's still seen as this own thing, and it's not being part of that central system being set up. So some of my work now is actually, while I'm working with organisations supporting the better communication of data, geospatial is constantly coming up, where I'm discussing with them, what are you using in terms of reporting? Oh yeah, we're using ABS. What year ABS?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. What's the difference? Is there a difference? They don't understand that, and that's a super big concern right now. So yeah, my background, where I had my archaeology lecture and someone coming along and just giving that aha moment, I really wish that that was something that every degree would have, so people would go, geospatial is part of it. Business, law, medicine, everything. I think everyone needs that aha moment, because they're all doing this type of work. But at the moment, it's still seen as this specialized niche thing that exists in the organization. So it is leading to a lot of real problems in terms of what's being developed, what's being communicated. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges there. So I kind of jumped the gun a bit in terms of going from my evolution. I might kind of step back a bit in terms of why I went into data journalism. So I was doing a lot of more traditional geospatial roles. I had previously been working as with Geoscience Australia, Australian Federal Police, and Department of Infrastructure in terms of their centralised geospatial units and setups. And it was always working on that outer, always being, you know, the map guys type of thing, which was, and I was very much seeing that it wasn't getting through to the people that needed it the most, which was more of your policy makers, that they were always not considering it as part of developing programs, developing grants, assessing, or if they were looking at assessments, it was always, oh, we look at postcode. And I think if anyone's worked with postcode, exactly, that's it's the naivety of the people that need to be getting that data and information from geospatial. They weren't getting the message because they were looking at other things. They were looking at, like, what can I grab from ABS? What's part of the centralized system? So I took on the role as the manager of data.gov.au when it was in its initial development stage of trying to really start merging the lines of data and also ensure that geospatial was part of the conversation, not its own specialized thing. You did get geospatial as part of data.gov.au, but it's still always seen as its own thing. And there is a little bit of that legacy of the groups that have been set up, the way things have been set up in the organisations. That's not something that was going to change straight away. But it was really important to get that discussion of, or representatives from a centralized kind of data discussion to also be part of the geospatial and have a little bit of that knowledge overflowing into the two sections. I think now at the moment, the Australian Bureau of Statistics are responsible for data.gov.au. So there is still a little bit of that overlap that's happening. But that also then just led me into data journalism after that. So really that next step, open data is one way of getting people more aware, but how do you get that next step of really educating a broader audience? And that's where you need to get out and get in front with them and be presenting stuff. So data journalism was an interesting leap for me. Worked with a range of organisations, but my favourite that I worked with was an organisation based out of Washington called DevEx, which is focused on the aid and development sector. That was really interesting because I was able to be exposed to a whole bunch of different work that's involving data. So you've got health, you've got environmental, you've got conflict, you've got a range of different stuff there. There's lots of grants going on. So being able to bring that data and information together and tell stories for the audience and help expose them was really important. And again, that fundamental thing of location makes all the difference. So you can talk, here's a global number. It's meaningless if you're not delving down into, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, understanding location-wise who's being excluded, who's not, and then trying to figure out, okay, what data can you bring in location-wise to explain that? So those were always those steps that I would take as part of developing stories to make it helpful and meaningful, as well as then work at developing interactives, most often involving location and drilling down by location to enable the audience then to go that next step and delve into the insights themselves and find out a little bit more. And that was, extremely important during when COVID broke out. So for over a year, probably a year and a half, I was actually collecting data weekly on the financial response to COVID. So how were countries giving funding away? Where were they giving it? What were the sectors? who were the recipients, who were the countries giving that information. And for over a year and a half, that was updated and was provided as like weekly blogs, as well as an interactive that was updated, and that was produced using Tableau. And for over a year and a half, you could then see how it changed from being, you know, a lot focused on PPE to vaccinations to you could see that just transition of how things happened during that crisis. So that was extremely helpful and useful to a range of people, and it's still a piece of work that I get notifications that it's being used for researchers when they're looking at what actually happened once COVID hit, how countries responded. So it's still a piece of work that is used to help understand those responses. So really, that one I'm particularly proud of there. But that was an important element, the geospatial, because you could easily say these countries have been excluded from this discussion. These countries are not receiving anything, or these countries are basically getting the scraps of everyone else. So you could absolutely see that was happening, and the regional responses as well. So countries focusing on their own little neck of the woods. Australia was obviously doing a lot of funding for the Pacific region, but they were very much disadvantaged in the response, just because of the location and really out of sight, out of mind, and a lot of thought of, because you know, they're secluded in the Pacific, it's not as much of a risk until the borders open again. So you could absolutely see that, and the location was really fundamental in being able to communicate that. And I think that's hopefully lessons that other people working in data communication, data journalism were able to get from that as well. I don't think not everyone does that as well. Some people are just focused, here's a chart. You can see a national chart doesn't really tell you the diversity of what happens based for very different areas and things like that. But that type of work in data journalism really highlighted to me how badly organizations communicate data and information. And one of those simple things as well is going, how do you allow people to have better access? Just providing a CSV file or a spreadsheet on your website, that's a tick in the box for, you know, open data and transparency, but it's not really helpful if people aren't going to download it and use it, or really need to understand the intricacies about your data and information. You know, you'll download something and it's got complicated cut down header values. You'll look at it, a lot of people will look at it and just go, yeah, I don't know what's going on here. So really working with organizations to explain to them and work with them of, how do you present this? And it's not necessarily having, you know, dashboards all the time with all little bits and pieces, but it's how do you enable ways to communicate this information that gives people that aha moment, that you understand what's being presented here. So thinking of working with them, of keeping it simple, like you do not have to put every element out there. What are the key messages that need to be told with this information? What are the key messages that can help people understand how this data can be used more, be more useful for their own business purposes? Those types of things there. And often it does go down to, well, let's tell a bit of a story, but then also yeah, let's have some type of interactive where you can delve into a little bit and then get further in. This was really helpful with some of my clients, including IP Australia. So IP Australia work with patent data and information. It's very technical. It's very complex trying to explain how this type of analysis works. And they needed to simplify the language. They needed to simplify the way that they present their information rather than being complicated. So they have ways of analyzing it where it's like talking about patent families and things like that. So the average person would be just like, I have no idea what you're talking about, goes over their heads. And in terms of understanding technology, it's quite strange because to understand the technology that's emerging, you have to look back at data 2 years ago, because that's where things are starting to be, you're getting applications for, and they will start emerging like 3 years down the track. So ways of trying to communicate that insight, which doesn't leave people scratching their head and saying this is too complicated, was really important. So they produce research reports, and I work with them on editing language and thinking about how you can divide it into more cleaner sections, provide clear insight at the start, and then really just make it flow a lot more easier and nicer and not necessarily feel as technical. But then also for clients, they were producing interactive reports as well. So that question of, is the report we're producing, will that have everything they need? That kind of just needs to be the guidance of set the tone of them thinking about how they can use the data to then be able to go through these interactive reports and actually delve down a little bit more deeper and look at different insights. Or they might even have a thought, 6 months down the track, I wonder if I looked at it this way, what does that happen? So that was a real bonus and a changing moment for them to think about how they present their reports and insights to clients. So these were paying clients that they would pay them for these reports. And it's changed the way that they produce that now. So they've gone, initially they were a Tableau shop, and they've moved to Power BI like a lot of government agencies because of the integration with Office 365. But it was always, as well, there was always that geospatial component with it and bringing that insight in. So understanding things about where patents were published, by who, where they were doing things. So it was really interesting having a look at the likes of US and China and European Union and which countries they were targeting as part of that, because you'd understand the competition in the market. Was this a really competitive one or not? And that element in particular was the part where all of the clients were just like, just give me the mapping stuff. And that was something that they hadn't done well before. So it was really great that we were able to bring that up and really highlight that and make it a valuable tool for the clients as well. In terms of other clients I've worked with in terms of data communication, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, really fundamental that you're providing that location information. And in terms of the work that I was doing, helping them with a number of projects that they were trying to get quicker data and information outside to that public, it was really geospatially focused, and then looking at the different tools that we're using as part of it. Tourism Research Australia is also a client of mine, and one of the big things as well there is looking at how the tourism is different in different areas of Australia. So there obviously is a lot of difference for tourism from Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane to regional areas, and they need that information to really help develop policies and programs to better support different areas. There's a grants area of Tourism Research Australia as well that need to look at that type of information to better enable guidance and grants for particular tourism businesses and understand what they're targeting there. So that's really been fundamental. But for a lot of organizations, again, it goes down to that. What are we talking about? What are we, when we're talking about particular boundaries that we're looking at, when we're looking at ABS, what is your definition of SA2? And the number of times it has been 2011, and I just go, oh my God, guys, what are we doing here? It's really highlighted for me that importance of geospatial being part of that centralized data conversation, which is just not happening as much as what it needs to. So I'm keen for that to be part of the next part of my journey. At the moment, I'm a part of the program committee for the UN World Data Forum 2026, which is taking place in Riyadh in November. So there will be, it will be hybrid. So feel free to join in. You do not have to get on a plane to go to Riyadh for that. But yeah, that will be an important one as well for bringing those discussions together. And then we're also talking AI as well. So there is geospatial that is part of the discussion. Again, it still feels a little bit separated from the broader discussion, and it would be nicer if it was more centralized. So I'm hoping that we can do a little bit more to bring that part of more of a broader data discussion rather than just having geospatial as a specialized discussion. But when we're thinking of these next stages of you know, AI being pushed on everyone, and we want to be thinking about you know, is it advantageous? Is it not? How are we making sure that people and communities aren't disadvantaged? Which at the moment we're absolutely going to be seeing disadvantage. We're just seeing disadvantage at the moment that if you're not the US, you're not going to get access to things, and there isn't ownership. So the likes of ownership and thinking about localized communities, different groups that are part of the discussion. We're going to have the Department of Health and Aging that's actually going to be presenting there in terms of their work with disability data, which I'm really looking forward to, and be interested to hear about their work with disability data and bringing location into it as well. So there's a lot that we can still do to bring geospatial more central. And I'm hoping that I can help really be part of that discussion as well.
Yeah, that has been an amazing journey, and some amazing insights as well. And I will often when I'm talking to people, because I think, you know, you've hit it, that often that the whole geospatial side is put in its own, you know, own basket. And I'll say to people, well, it's just data that has an extra element to it, you know, so it's got that spatial element to it, that so you can visualize it differently. But the rest of the data is no different to, you know, a finance spreadsheet, or, you know, the ABS data or whatever. But you need to know, like, where it's come from, when it was captured, and why it was captured. And I think the geospatial industry are their own worst enemies in a lot of that case, is that the metadata gets left to the end. And it's like you know, oh, do I really have to do this? And it's just, like, it might make sense when you're doing the project, but then, you know, 5 years down the track, people go, well, what was the reason this was captured? And so it's not metadata is not a now thing, it's a, you know, a future use thing, or, you know, and but it's, yeah, it's not seen. So many organizations either do it for the sake of doing it, so therefore it's done really badly, or don't do it at all, which is even worse. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I think you know, that, like the stuff you're talking about, you know, just being able to communicate that data, and the spatial side of it and all those sorts of things. Um, so yeah, that has been, you know, I, I I really take my hat off to you, because but it really shows that the spatial industry can open up to a whole range of different things. You don't have to be, you know, that person working for CFA doing the fire maps. You know, you can follow different directions, and it can lead in different ways, and you just, you know, find that area of the industry that, you know, resonates with you. So
Yeah,
that is, yeah,
absolutely. One of the things like that, it's really important though that we get geospatial as more of part of the discussion, or thinking about it like just more centrally, is the fact that when people don't, like, they're thinking of GIS as its own thing, you'll have people that are running around madly, oh, we've got some type of analysis we need to do this policy, and they just pull whatever they can, and they're doing an analysis based on something that they don't understand, and they've just pulled information and they don't know the questions to ask. So those questions of where did this data come from? What is it talking about? What is its accuracy? What is its timeliness? People don't know to ask those questions. And that's something that even if GIS was its own thing, that discussion more broadly as part of their role as part of the organization really should be to have that conversation as part of just normal everyday thing. When you're asking about data, where's it from? What's the timeliness? What does this mean? People are not thinking, you know, SA2 in 2011 is different to 2021, but it very much is.
yeah,
They're not thinking of that. They're just pulling stuff and going, yeah, this seems about right. And then they're making decisions on people's lives of data and information that is, you know, we're talking almost 20 years out of date.
yeah,
Dangerous. That's at the stage where it's actually quite dangerous. So, have, you know, who knows what would be happening if we're talking about then developing, you know, responses, or developing new health services, or things like that, if we're using out-of-date data and information. So it is really fundamental that GIS is part of it. But it is the thing that people high in the organization are just going, you know, oh, those map people, seeing
yep,
them niche, and they do one thing, they make the maps and stuff. And that's where the problem is, like that they really, GIS needs to be part of, you know, the broad discussion. And maybe, you know, when we're saying geospatial science or things like that, maybe it sounds a little bit too much for them. I don't know how we broach that discussion, but it really, as you said, it's data. It's data that,
yeah,
you know, location data. Maybe that's the simple way of doing things, that when we're analyzing locations, when we're analyzing, you know, where populations are, those type of, just keeping it a little bit broader in terms of those type of terminology might actually help. I'm just looking at the chat, and Bill has apologized that his internet is rubbish, but he said, you've touched on a perennial question which seems to circulate. How do I get an employer to recognize me as a GIS expert? So welcome your broader outlook. Is another angle on this that GIS skills are adjacent subset to domain knowledge, because you can often see that it is really the domain knowledge that makes some GIS people really excel. Would this be an approach for a youngster in this space? Work on both domain skills and GIS, then present yourself to employer as a domain expert first with maps that explain the domain. I think at the moment with data, I don't think anyone should necessarily be a domain expert unless your background is something like you are an archaeologist or you are an environmental science. If you are doing things working for organizations like I was, where it's like infrastructure, CFA, AFP, Geoscience Australia, having data knowledge and understanding how to ask the questions of data and be able to become a little bit of an expert in that space. I think that being able to do that is really important. In terms of getting the organisation to recognise as a GIS expert, I think it's more going that GIS is part of your role as a data expert and a data scientist. It really is fundamental to be thinking about data science and looking at those type of analysis. And I think that just needs to be part of the broader skills that a data expert brings to every role. I really would want that anytime there is a data expert talking to someone, that they're bringing geospatial as part of their knowledge and subset, even if this is financial data, looking at ATO, they absolutely need to be thinking of that as well. Like, which is these pockets that are not paying tax? Where are they? Why don't they pay tax? What do we need to know about these areas? There is so much that they need to be thinking of. I hope that helps. That's just my insight as well. I think it's a really challenging one.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, because it's really interesting that you know, the GIS team, when it's often segregated in a business, has to be a database administrator. They have to be you know, the cartographer. They have to, you know, do the data analysis. And sometimes that's the hard part about getting managers to, that they see the end product, they see the map and the nice report, but they don't realise all of those other things that need to, you know, you need to know to be part of that. And that's and some organisations, it's where they position that team. Like if you put the GIS team within, say, IT, then sometimes you get a better take up of, it's part of the data, it's part of that. But if it's this mapping team off to the side and things get, you know, channeled to it, yeah, then you struggle with that that identity of how do you get recognised as an expert? So yeah, great question, Bill, and great insights, Lisa. We might open it up if anyone's got any questions for Lisa. I really enjoy speaking to people who have lots of passion about what they do, and I really think, you know, I think we could chat for ages and ages, really delving into it. But we've got a few people on, and so if you do have a question that you want to ask Lisa, or a more general question, either take yourself off mute and ask it, or type it into the chat, and we can chat for the next 5-10 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up from there. Got someone coming in late. Glenn?
Oh, Lachlan's got his hand up.
Please go.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. It's been really interesting to kind of hear some of your backstory and the areas that you've been working on. I guess my question relates to this digital divide, if you like, particularly I think starting to become more relevant with a rural and remote kind of area versus the city area. And now that I guess AI tools are starting to really become mainstream. I previously worked with the National Indigenous Australians Agency, so I kind of had a first-hand experience of what it was like for some really remote communities to try and grapple with just even the internet, you know. So just wondering, in terms of the World Data Forum that you're presenting, is there going to be any kind of thing looking at that kind of either digital divide or remoteness factor for countries and people?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important part. So the program has just been released, and there is discussions about you know, how do you breach that gap? How do you ensure that people aren't going to be left behind, or they have because one of the big things is, okay, there's these programs that enable you to do things faster, but then you've got to localize it and still make it useful to local content. So that's a skill set that won't necessarily exist for everyone. So how does it form partnerships to bring that together? But also, as part of the World Data Forum, there's always a thing that's a statement that's agreed upon by countries, and I believe there's a lot of negotiation that goes into it, but that is going to be part of what needs to be communicated as part of it. So this is being forced upon people at a rapid rate, and then it's like, well, how do you make sure that it is going to be helpful and useful and usable, especially to everyone equally in the world? And at the moment, it's looking like it's going to create more of a divide. I believe there was something that came out from one UN organization just yesterday or the day before, talking about how they're seeing that divide is already going to be growing, so it needs to be dealt with as soon as possible and recognized as soon as possible. So that will be part of discussions, possibly programs that are set up, and hopefully as part of the statement that comes out of the World Data Forum.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Lisa and Dean. Thank you. What a really insightful conversation. I realize we've only got 2 minutes left. I'll try and make it quick, but I've worked in the analytics engineering industry the last decade, and you touch on a really fascinating point through your journalism around, interacting with people who might not be experienced in geospatial. It can seem very foreign. There are those disconnects. I guess very quickly, if you could try and elude and elaborate just on how you go about sort of educating people, helping them to come along on that spatial journey. Again, like yourself, I've worked across many industries, many sectors. And so while it might not seem like there is overlap between them, as both yourself, Lisa, and Dean have touched on, geospatial is somewhat of a mesh, a connect between those. How can you bring people on that journey, across all of those different industries and sectors? I hope it's not too broad a question, but just something just to elaborate on just that a little bit further.
Yeah, one of the best ways of actually doing it has been when I'm getting people's data to actually combine it with geospatial stuff and actually do it and say, look at how much insight you can actually get by, we've got your business data on grants, but then we can actually bring in information about the population in this area that we're delivering grants to and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, okay. But I'm not necessarily saying to them at all geospatial. I'm actually just showing them what they need to do and what they need to bring in, and then showing them how I've done that and what I've brought in. And then they start going, oh, actually, can we do more? What can we bring in now if we're looking at, schools in the area and things like that? And it's like, yeah, we can bring all that in. So starting them by actually going, here's your data and information, here's your reporting things, here's some extra bonus analysis that I think will be beneficial to you. Because initially, they're not thinking necessarily of that until you show them. And then once you've done that, that's what they're thinking. So I've had people who are senior executives in organizations, to be then going to, when I've helped them develop something that really empowers their reporting and knowledge and information, then they'll go to other areas and going, where's the map? It's the wind, but they're not thinking geospatial at all. They're not engaging the GIS team because they're off doing their own thing. They're in their own little silo and they're not asking that type of information. But getting them to start thinking of that, and then, you know, educating them on, oh no, we don't want to do postcode, you know, that's not really helpful. And then showing them what postcodes actually look like straight away. They go, wow, that's a mess. Let's use something else. So those are the beneficial things of, like, not necessarily talking, but showing, and then getting them to think and then coming back with more questions, because you've switched something in their brain that they're now thinking differently about how they can access their information and present their information.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for sharing those insights from across your career.
Yeah, no, I do think that's actually a really good point about, you know, just demonstrating on how useful that additional layer can be. And so much in different projects that I've worked on, you know, if you can get people at the start and go, all right, we're collecting this information, what do we want out of it at the end? And then you're not redoing that data capture or that, you know, that analysis multiple times. You can go, all right, well, if we bring in some GIS data, if we bring in this data, then you're, you know, you've got this richer product. You know, you still might be saying, giving the same answer at the end, but
Exactly.
you're giving a visual tool and a, you know, a chart or a, you know, a report or whatever it happens to be.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that question. And Lisa, thank you for your time today. Thank you, Glenn, for your question, and Bill as well, and a couple of people who have dropped off, Christine and Mega. But thank you for being here today. Next week, we go to completely the opposite end of the scale. We're talking to a soon-to-be graduate from Flinders Uni, and a recent immigrant to Australia. So it's this combined story of coming from Africa. So a guy by the name of Moses Ongusu. So he's been studying at Flinders Uni. So yes, it's right at the beginning of his career. And so it's part of his journey here. So if you have time to tune in next week, same time, otherwise you can watch the recording. But thank you again, Lisa. I find that very insightful, you know, and a very interesting career path. And thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone, and chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Lisa.